Welcome folks, it's time for another installment of the rebuilding of the Thermoquad carburetor. If you've been following this series so far, best thing to do, my suggestion would be, is to follow them in sequence. In this particular rebuild series, you're looking for letters of the alphabet, the English alphabet. The other series I have there is in parts with numbers, and that's just general information and things that I've discovered about these things to help you out. So on with the rebuild here now. Before we get started, don't forget, you got to get yourself some safety glasses right from the start of working on anything industrial, any parts at all. Protect your eyes at all costs, because things do go flying and things happen. You don't want to get splashed in the eyes with carburetor cleaner or any chemicals like that. It's just not a good thing to be doing. So get your safety glasses on, keep them on at all times when you're working on these things. I'd also mentioned previously about whenever you have volatile chemicals, for instance the carburetor cleaner they use to scrub these things up, you don't want to be using them inside your house at all, because you've got pilot lights, if you've got natural gas fired water heaters and furnaces and things of the like, or even a dryer. I had mentioned gas fired dryer with natural gas. So do this outside, not near any lit barbecues, have nobody smoking, keep the kids away kind of thing, you know, keep it safe. Okay, on with this we go. I'll start with the top half just to show you, to scrub it up. Like I'd mentioned in the previous videos, I just leave the choke plate in here, right, and the secondary air door and the choke linkage and shaft mechanism in here. If you want to go further, say if you're doing a show car or something, then naturally you would take all this extra stuff out. But if you're just going to cover it mostly with the big air cleaner, especially the stock ones, you wouldn't hardly see any of this carburetor anyway. So just to scrub it up, if you're not going to go the extra distance, it's up to you. It's only just a matter of getting a 3/16 socket on a small spin handle, something like so. Seen it in previous videos. Wrong socket on there right now, but you can just undo all these things if you really want to go that far. But as far as everyday driving and stuff, unless it's a show car, just leave these three items in here. It'll save you a lot of time, and especially if you don't get it back perfectly the way it's supposed to be. And a lot of them had a little spring in here, and if you don't get it hooked up right, or else you lose it, then you're really in trouble. Mind you, I've worked this without having the spring. I've actually taken the spring out of here, but we can get to that in a future video. Scrubbing it up, keep your safety glasses on, get yourself some rubber gloves, right? In my videos here, you'll probably see me using bare hands, but I've been in the industry and working with heavy machinery and stuff for years, so it doesn't bother my hands at all. But for you, put some rubber gloves on to protect your skin. And because of this, the fact that this solvent is so volatile, like I can't stress enough, is to keep it away from any open flame or cigarettes or anything of that nature. Do it outside, away from all that kind of stuff. So you just want to get an old toothbrush. This is what I use. I got several of them. This is just one I'm going to use for the example for today. Used one that you're not going to be using anymore to brush your teeth. I always save these old ones, and then they come in great for scrubbing up the dirt and stuff in here. You just watch yourself when you get down into you know, the really small orifices and air bleeds and things. You don't want to start getting too rough with them, but scrubbing in and around the areas, getting in there whatever you can. Just use anything that's got a soft basic bristle brush. You don't want to use like a wire brush or anything. You'll start scratching it all up. So this with some carburetor cleaner works great. Keep your safety glasses on. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go back and to the other side of this now. I don't have it bolted together, so I can just lift this off. Like I'd mentioned in previous videos, is always, if you're going to sit it down, never sit it down on the surface inside, especially if you don't have the secondary jets on. You always want to keep them on unless you're actually working on the air bleed tube inside, like I'd mentioned in a previous video. So just slide this out of the way for now. I actually use that float bowl and throttle body to support this if I'm just going to let it sit around and work on the top a little bit. But on the inside here, I can show you a few things. I should mention this before I forget. On the one that I spent most of my time working on, I noticed there was a machining flaw when they actually manufactured this thing. So right in here, there's two threaded openings here, right in here, and that's where the fuel comes in through the needles and seats. Now, there was a steel washer I'd mentioned in a previous video, and it's got to have a flat surface where that washer sits, and then you screw in the seat into that. Now what I noticed about the one on one side, they've actually looked like they drilled it in too far, so it had a taper on it, but there was just enough of a flat where it would compress that steel washer in there and create the seal. So if it's messed up in there, you could get some fuel going past the regulation, well, you could say the designed regulation of the fuel coming in through the needle and seat. So if you have the needle and seat doing its job and you have a bad seal because of bad machining or some stuff where it didn't get pushed down tight in there and sealed up, the fuel could actually bypass needle and seat assembly, and you could get a rich running carb, high fuel level on one side of the float bowl. So watch in there, get yourself a flashlight. Magnifying glasses are great if you can't see that well down in there, but a flashlight, make sure there's a flat surface and it's all clean in there. So check on both sides, make sure that the machining is done correctly, it's not messed up, or maybe a previous person is has previously damaged it or what have you. But yeah, check in there. That's the first place you check. If you want to have a good running carb without going rich on you, make sure that those two surfaces way down inside there past the threads is flat and fairly shiny and clean looking. Okay, another thing I can't stress enough on this next part is the accelerator pump housing. Okay, so I'll just prop it up here so you can see what's going on. Okay, right in here there's a bore. That's where the check valve for the accelerator pump is there. It draws fuel in through the bottom here and into the cavity inside the cylinder here. And there's your accelerator pump plunger. It fits down inside here like so, and it actually travels in and out of that that cylinder there to give you the squirt of gas. There's a tube that joins from this little nipple here. It comes over to here. You've probably seen it in the other videos where you got to make sure you don't kink that when you install the new one, and it just basically takes the squirt of fuel from inside the accelerator pump cylinder over into this and up into this boss and the passageway up into your squirters for your to go into your primary throttle bores. So there's a couple things you got to watch here. I've actually measured this one up here. I believe it was 13/16 of an inch diameter bore, and you want to make sure that a good way to tell whether it's messed up, especially on the end, is where you have your check valve. I've got a new and older style one here. One's a pressed steel, a factory original, and most of the aftermarket guys I think have gone pretty well mostly to this machine brass, which is far superior. Okay, so when you sit this in the end here, it shouldn't just drop in. There's a shoulder on here, little shoulder, and that's got to be topped in with say a block of wood and a hammer. It's got to be a press fit, in other words, after you put your accelerator pump plunger and the spring in there. So there's a first telltale. Make sure that that's got some interference fit. Okay, so that's at the start of the bore. Now inside you want to take a look down in there. A flashlight is a good thing to use, and it's what you're looking for is something that's nice and smooth, clean looking, shiny. It's aluminum, might be a bit stained with years of use or whatever, but you can get in there with your finger. This is the part. Make sure it's clean and dry. You could dry it out with a rag, and then you feel around with your finger. Like your skin and your fingers are very good at feeling different things like ridges. Like down halfway down in here there's a big hole here, and the pump plunger, it actually only goes it only travels about 7/16 of an inch when you figure you've got the check valve and everything in there, so it only comes up to about halfway. The top of this nylon piece above the rubber cup only comes up about that far, center of the hole, and if you feel inside there you'll feel a machine shoulder. So the only part that has to be smooth is from about half the diameter of that hole and all the way out to the end here. Okay, so what you're looking for, you take a look in there, you clean it all up, and you don't want any score marks, pit marks, like if you had a carb that's been sitting around and who knows where it's been stored or what have you, or thrown around or whatever, but you want a nice round cylinder, a diameter in that cylinder. Feel around in there for anything that's not good. You want it smooth as possible. Okay, In order for this to do its job, okay, you're going to be putting a new one in there. It's got to be really smooth, and it's got to be round and no gouges or anything in there. You start having some bad gouges in there, it's just gonna, this can't take up and seal when it squirts the gasoline, and what happens is you end up getting a bit on the lean side. So you got to make sure this is very important on any carburetor that has this style of accelerator pump, where it has the plunger style of pump. So get in there after you've cleaned it all out and dried it, have a good feel around in there. If you've got big hands, you might have to go with your pinky finger, but feel around all the way around and have a look. And if it isn't that smooth and it's not too damaged, what I do, you can do it with your rubber gloves on, but I just use the bare finger, and I get a piece of 600 grit wet dry sandpaper, much like automotive bodywork guys use. You can get this at hardware store or in any place that sells sandpaper, the wet dry style, but 600 grit. I wouldn't go any coarser than that. A higher number is fine because it's finer. And just get in there and go in a circular motion. Like, don't go up and down into the bore, but go in a circular motion all the way around. A few drops of oil on there, motor oil, it works really well. And go all the way around. That'll take any, sometimes there's some crud or whatever on there, and it helps take that off. But just don't get carried away. All you're trying to do is smooth it out. You're not trying to remove any of the aluminum at all. So you just go all the way around. I'm not going to really be able to go all the way around here because I've got this fixed in this vise to show you in the video. But all the way around, just keep going back and forth in a circular motion, right? And then you clean it out again. It's going to have oil residue. The oil makes kind of a sludge when you actually sand it, and it actually helps it from scoring. Like if you were to use solvent or something, you'd have probably scratch marks in there. So the oil is really good at making things like almost turns it into a lapping compound, and it's very good for smoothing things out. A little bit of motor oil on that sandpaper. 600 grit or a higher number is fine. Okay, so you clean all that up again, and then when you're satisfied that that's all nice and it's not gouged or pitted really bad, then you're ready to go with this part. That's very important. So what happens if you have a malfunction in there, be it the finish on there or one of these cups here is even new, it might be damaged or whatever. Anytime the fuel bypasses between that cylinder wall and this piston cup, you're not going to be able to get that full squirt of gas. So it's very important that you have a really good fit in here. And like this one here, I can show you. It just drops in there like this rubber cup here. This orange rubber cup here is I don't know if it's shrunk, undersized, but the bore, like I say, I've measured it with a telescoping gauge, or some people call it a snap gauge, and a micrometer, and it's within 1/1000th of an inch to what it should be specification wise. So this one is, you can't use this. It looks good, it's just way too loose. It's just no good. It's good for paperweight and to show people on the video what they look like. That's about it. Okay, so you're satisfied that once you pass that part of the test, then you're ahead of the game, because it's very, very important to make sure that bore is nice and smooth and in good condition. Okay, now that I've over elaborated on that, you can't be, I guess I'm probably getting a little bit too crazy and carried away with it, but if you want this thing to run like a champ and as good as they possibly can, that's one of the most important things on this carburetor inside. Okay, so there's a few other things here. I'd mentioned always to keep your secondary jets in place, because there's some idle bleed tubes that come down in here. Okay, so there's some tiny little holes in the side there, and believe it or not, I'm going to take you fishing right now. What's this guy talking about, fishing? Okay, now when it comes down to probing any of these small, well, you won't really have to do the larger ones. You'll see some big holes in these brass tubes and in other places. But with these small ones, if you can't see daylight through them, and also it's a good idea to run something in there, but never use a metal wire of any kind. You distort the finish and the sizing of it. So here's where we go fishing. It's just a piece of fishing line. I put a micrometer on this just for you techies, and it comes to 23/1000th of an inch in diameter. And you can get a smaller one than that. I wouldn't go much bigger, but there's little holes in there you can probe with the fishing line. And if I can do this, There, it goes right through. There's a little hole that goes all the way through both sides. So with a little bit of carb cleaner, your safety glasses on, and your rubber gloves, you can put some carburetor cleaner there and just run it back. But don't try to saw anything. Just work it around a little bit, and that helps break up any of this stuff. Like gas, when it evaporates, it turns into a hard glue or varnish. So with the carb cleaner and a little bit of rubbing motion from the fishing line, that'll help make sure you get your hole back to the correct size. Because if it's got any kind of a crust of dried up gasoline there, what'll happen is in the case of an air bleed, you're shutting off some of the air, so it's going to have more fuel going into the mixture. And conversely, if it's a passageway for fuel to go in, and that gets small, then you're going to be running lean because it restricts the amount of fuel. Well, let's say the air bleed is okay and the fuel gets restricted, then it goes the other way. So there's some very important things for your idle quality. Remember to put these back on when you're not doing anything. And maybe while I'm at this secondary tube, I'll just do a quick flip here. Okay. Actually, I will leave that for later. I'll just go on to this because it's about all I can show you on this side anyways. But in here, where the tube joins the fuel from the accelerator pump, this one on this $25 carb here I use for parts and the videos. I had probed this actually quite a bit. Some cleaner and some fishing line, and this was plug solid. Same with this. You got to make sure that you can get like this one is in storage for a number of years, just an old one, like I say, for parts. So you probe both of those openings there with the fishing line. Make sure, or if you can see a daylight in there, that's a good start too. But also the most very important part is you could call them idle jets, but they actually look like idle tubes. Down in here there's a larger hole that feed the main nozzles on both sides, right in here where these little seals go. The important little sort of like O-rings with the grooves in them. But down in here, when you get yours apart, there's two little brass tubes there, and what they're for is to supply fuel for the idle speed only. They're the idle jets actually. Now they're very important, especially on one that's been sitting around not used. They get plugged up pretty bad. Same thing with the fishing line, and a bit of carb cleaner get in there. And another telltale that I can advise you on here, say you go down one side, and a lot of these passageways, they come to a dead end. Like the fishing line will not go around a sharp corner. So when you hit bottom there, you can just get your thumbnail rather, pull it out and see how much of the fishing line is actually going down in there. And then when you do the other side, they should all be about the same when you compare left to right. Now say if I put this fishing line down in there, and I'm only going down, say half of that distance for argument's sake, right? Then that would tell me right away is that there's some kind of a blockage in there. Okay, so now I know I've got to get some more carb cleaner and poke a little bit more with my fishing line, and maybe some compressed air, safety glasses on of course. And the fishing line, you can't beat it. It's not going to hurt anything. Never use wire. You'll scratch things up. These are finely calibrated, a lot of these smaller holes. You don't want to, distort them or enlarge them unless that's the purpose that you're trying to do for a modification. Okay, so always keep your secondary jets in place, hand tight. Also, after this thing is all cleaned up, don't forget when you put your secondary jets and you're going to reinstall this thing, get your, I believe it was a 5/16 open end wrench, and there's two flats on this secondary jet. Don't forget to tighten them up on final assembly, like you've been doing this hand tight thing for protection for that idle tube inside. Okay, so you want to probe any of the smaller tubes or whatever. The larger ones generally don't need it because they're quite large. Although it probably wouldn't hurt to run it around with a bit of carb cleaner and your safety glasses on, and make sure that there's no coating of dried up gas. Okay, so accelerator pump bore has to be nice, slippery, smooth. And the smoother excuse me, the smoother the finish in there, the longer your accelerator pump probably will last. If you have rough spots in there, it'll probably start eating away and creating friction with the seal cup on the accelerator pump plunger. So those items underneath here, don't forget, check inside where the seats compress that steel washer up against the casting inside. Make sure there's not a machining flaw like I found. If that's the case, you might have to make up a gasket out of gasket material to make sure that you get a proper seal. Okay, so at the bottom you can do the same thing with the toothbrush, scrub it all up. And then this spring, you can see on this one, it's been around in storage for a while, it's all rusty and everything. I could probably save that, get in there and maybe even disassemble it, but if I got in there and with some smaller things like toothpicks and whatnot and bamboo skewers and worked at it, I could probably get most of that off of there. But like I say, this is just a demonstration carb and a parts carb for me. Okay, now with the top part, flip her back over using the float bowl again, so we don't damage anything underneath. Also, maybe I can even add another one in here. Okay then, like for people that say, oh, might have a warped float bowl, you can make sure you don't drop this thing off here. You hold it down there and you can actually run this thing around and look at the gap. This is the gasket's out of here, mind you, and you can see, and you can actually wiggle it a little bit, kitty corner, and if it's got too much of a gap in here in one place, you know, you can probably get away with, you know, let's say a 32nd of an inch might be pushing it a bit, but those gaskets are pretty supple. They can take up a lot. A telltale would be if you had something that's too warped just after, say, you started running it and your floats are working correctly, and if you have fuel leaking out of here past the gasket, that will tell you that there's a bit of a gap there. Or if you see light, if you shine a light from back after you've assembled it with the gasket. So if your floats aren't flooding out, that gasket should seal okay and you shouldn't get any fuel leaks out of here. I've never had that problem, but I just thought I'd mention that while we're at it. Okay, on to the top half here. There's only a few more little things to go. Spin this around here. Now on both sides here, in the previous videos I made, showed you a plate on each side, and it covers some idle air bleeds and whatnot in there. You can get your fishing line and your carb cleaner, safety glasses on, away from all the sparks and flames. Outside you go. The bigger ones aren't too much of an issue, like I keep saying, but there's a smaller one now, right down in here. If you look way down in there, you probably won't see it on the video, but when you actually have one of these in front of you, you'll see a brass tube sticking out there. They refer to that as, you could call it an air bleed, but they might have called it a bypass, but basically it lets some air in there, right? See, the fuel's coming up solid from that idle tube or jet I was showing you underneath, and as it comes to the top, it starts picking some more air up, and it goes back down through some channels through the float bowl, some holes in the float bowl, and down into the throttle body. Okay, so you can get your fishing line, a bit of carb cleaner, and if you get it just right, I've done it before, but you can get your fishing line right down in there and make sure that none of those air bleeds are plugged at all. Otherwise you get a richer mixture, which you don't want unless it was designed for that in the first place. So there are a couple of things. There's a little air bleed in here. Okay, this fishing line that I got is 23 thousandths of an inch. It goes in there. So these are just things like, say, a professional rebuilder, for instance. He might just go ahead and you know, soak it in carb cleaner, blow it out with compressed air, but he has no way of telling whether there's actually a passage that's plugged. And that's why I use the fishing line. That puts my mind at rest, knowing if I can get that through the orifice and the channel until it hits the dead end. I know I've at least covered that much ground and know that it's going to be doing its job without a piece of crud in there that's blocking either an air passage or a fuel passage. So there are, like I say, take a look around in there. There's that one, and actually there's one you can't get at unless you take, there's some aluminum plugs in here. Now I'm not sure, I doubt if the rebuild kits have it, but you can actually remove these, and I think there's a restrictor in there, a little brass restrictor pressed in one of the channels in there. You can't see it, like I say, unless you can't even get at it unless you remove these aluminum, what they call Welch plugs. Okay, so just without going that far, there are a few of these in here. So you just look for which ones that are small, and if you can't get this into the openings, you can go to a smaller diameter fishing line. Okay, and then right out in here, I don't know if I'd already mentioned it, but this is where the secondary jets initially get their air from to bleed air into the secondary mixture when you're passing fuel and air through the secondary jets and on into the secondary nozzles, which are just ahead of the air door here underneath. Okay, so there's one on each side, one there, and it's a little piece of brass tubing sticking up, not much more than a 32nd of an inch or so. And you can do the same thing. You'll go down there probably an inch and a half or so, and those idle, should say the secondary air bleed tubes, they come to a dead end, so you're only going to go down there an inch or inch and a half or something, whatever it works out to. Just make sure that they go all the way down and into that cross hole I showed you. So that's pretty much it for this top section. You call it the air horn, or you can call it the top casting, top plate. As long as whoever you're talking to knows what you're talking about. Alright, so there's a section that we're more concerned with right there, right on the top. Okay, so just remember the safety part. Away from all spark and flames when you're using volatile chemicals, any cleaners. Take it outside and keep your safety glasses on and gloves, especially when you're dealing with chemicals and whatnot. It's not that great for the skin or your health for that matter. Also breathing, you might want to put a dust mask on if you start blowing things around, and make sure that you're not going to send any fumes or anything anybody else's way. Keep the kids safe, keep them away. Okay folks, that's it for today's installment. I hope you enjoyed what I had to teach you today. You probably learned a few things myself too, because I'm learning as I go along as well, because a lot of this stuff is, I don't know, I invent as I go kind of thing. Fishing line was something I've been doing for a while, but it's probably the best thing you can do to make sure that those small passageways aren't plugged inside. And like I say, the commercial rebuilders, they'll just soak it in carb cleaner or whatever they do and blow it with some compressed air, and then, oh, that's it, let's go. Well, you know, if you ever get something lodged in there that the air never got out, you won't find it unless you do some probing. So fishing is a good thing to do once in a while. That nylon fishing line won't hurt anything in these. The brass is pretty tough stuff. Just don't be putting any steel wires in there at all, that's all. Okay, so that's that installment. Take care folks, have yourselves a nice day, and bye for now.